In 2021, in celebration of the 20th anniversary, the International Film Festival of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria invites you to create video essays related to any of the works screened in any of the 19 previous editions. A reflection on film images contrasted with those same images. In this video, I've decided to take the term correspondence in its two senses. First, communication between people through the exchange of letters, and second, complementary relationships, equivalence, or symmetry that exists or is established between two or more things.
Hello?
Dear Maurice, please allow me to call you by your first name. I am only 7 years older than you. I know that you reject the stuffiness of the Edwardian era. In response to the invitation to dialogue over some of the works of the festival, I've decided to travel to 2004, to a happier year, as the original dedication of the novel Maurice by Edward Morgan Forster in 1913, the England of the Upstairs and Downstairs series. 2004 did not yet know the financial crisis caused by the real estate bubble of 2008, nor could it imagine the horror of the science fiction cinema that we would be living in 2020. In 2004, I was about 24 years old. The Ishmael Merchant James Ivory retrospective offered us a look at the subtle, elegant, and accurate depiction of family and social dramas in Howard's End, A Room with a View, and The Remains of the Day. Maurice was another adaptation of a Forster novel, following the success of A Room with a View. Producer and director were creative and sentimental partners for more than 40 years, almost as many years as from the time Forster began Maurice's manuscript in 1913 until its posthumous publication in 1971. Forster feared the media, social, and legal repercussions of his novel, and even questioned its literary value. What would have happened if the acclaimed author of Passage to India had published it at the time? I think there's an interesting story there too. My relationship with Maurice began when I was about 10 years old in 1990, and the film was shown on the second channel of Spanish television. My father forbade my sisters and me to watch the movie. I was a curious child, fully aware of my orientation and terrified to hide the secret from everyone, and especially from my father.
Omit the reference to the unspeakable vice of the Greeks.
The unspeakable vice of the Greeks that Maurice's teacher at King's College, Cambridge referred to. We had 2 TV sets, the big one in the living room and a small one in my sister's room. I clipped the film review from ABC's newspaper, Black and White. A picture of Maurice and Alec.
I know about you and Mr. Durham.
I always wondered why Alec appeared on the film poster when Clive's role was more important throughout the movie. Maybe it was because that was the candid, happy ending that the inexperienced Forster was looking for, even though his more seasoned gay writer friends warned him that this relationship, the fruit of curiosity and sexual desire, would only last a few weeks. I think so too. I'm sorry, Maurice. For Forster, however, a happy ending to his male love story was imperative. Ivory and Forster went for that happy ending in a tale of love between men, moving away from tragic endings with suicide and punishment, as was the custom. The romance with Alec seemed a bit out of the blue, or deus ex machina in narrative terms, but it is forgivable.
Happy birthday, sir.
Disobeying my father, I remember watching the beginning. On a walk on the beach, a teacher asked a young Maurice about his male family figures.
I'm going to talk to you for a few moments as if I were your father. It isn't anything your mother could say.
Maurice tells him that he is fatherless and lives with his 2 sisters and mother. The teacher draws in the sand some lines that represent a first lesson on sex, and they continue walking without erasing it.
Your body is his temple, and you must never, ever pollute that temple.
After a while, the lines that I never clearly saw shake up a family. The film disappears and I am simply left with the magazine clippings, imagining its plot. In the early 90s, we depend on television programming. There was no YouTube, no internet in fact. There was no way to retrieve something that happened last night. There were video stores, of course, but we didn't have a VCR at home. There was a movie theater in town, long closed. It was a majestic and abandoned building where a few years later, as a teenager, I would go with Pedro, my best friend, to explore. At that time, UberX had not yet been invented, nor was it okay to touch and kiss a friend of the same sex. In the dilapidated building, Pedro and I did many things. Among them, we found the lobby cards, the photochromes of Maurice's film screening. I still have them. My attempts to approach other boys were awkward and ridiculous, like Maurice's with Dr. Barry's nephew Dickie, a sequence deleted from the final edit. In the novel, Forster endows the scene with a twisted sense of humor by presenting Maurice's approach as those of a clumsy, horny teenager and Dickie as a curious and not entirely bashful participant. In the film, this entire subplot was deleted in the final edition.
In the attic over this. If you want anything, I'm all night alone.
Also deleted was any reference to attraction to another man 30 years ago. As a child and adolescent, you had to cover up, hide, keep away, and eradicate any suspicion if you didn't want to be teased by your classmates, ridiculed by your teachers, or slapped and reprimanded by your parents for something that seemed like divine punishment.
I think if a man has ideas like that, he should have the courtesy to keep them to himself.
No, on the contrary, one must talk.
Maurice was also the book that I would sneak and read at the local library. I didn't dare borrow it. It was 1992, a year of Olympics and the World Exposition, but anything having to do with homosexual topics was still taboo in a small town. I thought about stealing the book, but the embarrassment of being caught and my father finding out kept me from doing so. One day the book was gone, and once again I was left without knowing the rest of the story. I remember being very much so aware that I was different from everyone else as a child. I asked my parents to see a psychologist. With what seemed a mix of astonishment and bewilderment, they quickly rejected the idea, as if a crow hovered over them.
And who put that lie into your head? You, whom I see and know to be a decent fellow. Dr. Barry, I want... No, sir, I'll not discuss. The worst thing I can do for you is to discuss.
And they hoped to scare it away with their harsh disapproval. Knowing the story in bits and pieces, I never quite understood why Maurice and Clive were splitting up. In the novel, Forrester notes that Clive preferred to keep the relationship on more platonic terms, and Maurice had more carnal desires.
I think it would spoil everything.
In the film, screenwriters Ivory and Kit Hessick-Harvey elaborate a plot point that benefits the structure of the script and explain his behavior. Clive is terrified by the trial and conviction for obscenity, scandal, and homosexuality to which another friend of the group, Lord Risley, is subjected. The police arrested him after setting him up with a handsome officer as bait. In another deleted sequence, Lord Risley even commits suicide. This event functions as a warning.
You will never mention that subject again, St. Cox, while you remain in employment here.
Clive searches for answers in the cradle of civilization that Ivory films in Sagesta, Sicily, but returns without them. The place is empty and he fears for his future.
What was Greece like?
Rather disappointing, I'm afraid. It's not exactly what I'd expected it would be.
In 2004, at the Ishmael Merchant James Ivory Tandem Retrospective, I was finally able to see the film in its entirety. I remember how terrified I was of the scene in which the butler was about to catch the leads together. That fear, that guilt, that shame, I recognized it well. A familiar feeling, forgotten, overcome, but always familiar. This is a feeling alien to those who have not had to suffer it. That's why it seems to me that the film speaks directly to me. I got the film on VHS in a secondhand store. I lent it to my friend Pedro. His girlfriend finds the tape in the VCR and reads some of our text messages. This girl is no fool. They still get married, and Pedro and I stop seeing each other. I guess it was meant to be.
And the Oscar goes to James Ivory. Call me by...
I was delighted when James Ivory got his first Oscar at the age of 89 for the adapted screenplay of Call Me By Your Name. He dedicated it to his late partner, Ismael Merchant. In 30 years, some things have changed. Maurice is no longer taboo in the film industry. It was a huge driving force in expanding so many boundaries. Sometimes there's pushback and regression. It scares me just a little, but I also have hope.